Good evening. I'm Brian Ziegler, Artistic Director of the Marcus Institute for Vocal Arts at the Juilliard School. I'm so happy to welcome you this evening to Operatic Encores, Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin. I want to thank all of you for your support of Juilliard. It means so much to us, to our students, to those of us in administration and faculty. Your support has been steadfast, particularly during this very, very rough pandemic period. So thank you. This is a very exciting moment for me to be able to go back and review a really favorite production of mine that I think was so innovative and really provided a springboard for some of our artists to do some amazing things. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions as the evening rolls along, as we get our panel discussion going. So I want to encourage all of you to type into the chat function. We'll have a moderator who's able to look at those questions, so you'll be able to speak live with our panel and ask some questions. You know, before we get into Eugene Onegin, I just want to take a minute to talk about this remarkable year that we're in right now, where there's been a lot of remote study, but we've also made some remarkable modifications at Juilliard to be able to continue our in-person learning, which is really the core of what we do at Juilliard. This crazy picture you're all seeing is just one of the ways we've adapted to in-person learning in a COVID environment. As many of you know, of course, we have to wear masks all the time, and it is really tough to sing in a mask, and it is tough to teach a person in a mask. So the adaptation you're seeing here is where the administrative offices on the second floor have graciously stayed home so that we can use their offices for singing and playing. So you'll see that I and the pianist are in an outer office. The singer is in an inner office, unmasked, but playing and singing in real time. That's how a lot of our coaching and preparation for operas and voice lessons have been done all year. We actually have 5 of these setups here at Juilliard, which has allowed live in-person singing to go on starting all the way back in November. So when a lot of other schools were all completely still Zoom, we were able to be live, which I have to say is a big, big part of our student success. And I have to thank the school from the bottom of my heart for this enormous investment in technology, which this took. We've had to make so many adaptations, but it's been critical for us to keep the ball rolling. And of course, we have our supporters to thank for those investments. So thanks to all of you. Moving on to Eugene Onegin, I want to introduce you to our first panelist, kind of the host for this evening, who is Cori Ellison. She's on vocal arts faculty, and she is a very knowledgeable dramaturg and a very frequent lecturer on opera, and she is going to host this evening. And just before we move to her, I want to say that one of the things that has been remarkable about this production of Eugene Onegin is it caught some of our singers in a very early stage of their development, but Miles Mikkonen, Raquel Gonzalez, and Taka Onishi all went on to reprise these roles on the professional stages. Miles sings at the Met Opera, as he'll tell you. Taka Onishi sang the role of Onegin at the Lyric Opera of Chicago after this, and Raquel has done several revivals of Tatiana in Eugene Onegin. So this was an important first step for them of many, and I know you'll enjoy the production. Enjoy.
Welcome. I'm Cori Ellison, a proud vocal arts faculty member, and I'd like to offer a bit of context for this presentation of Eugene Onegin. Imagine the nerve it would take to base an opera on your nation's finest and most iconic literary work by your country's most venerated author. Well, that's exactly what Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky did when he created an opera based on Alexander Pushkin's revered literary classic, Eugene Onegin. It would have seemed to most Russians at the time at best a batty idea, at worst a sacrilege, a shocking display of hubris. To give you an idea of how central to Russian culture Pushkin's novel was and is, here's a photo of then Crown Prince Nikolai, later Russia's last Tsar, portraying Onegin in a domestic production around 1890. Tchaikovsky originally balked at setting Pushkin's Onegin to music when the contralto Elizaveta Lavrovskaya proposed the idea to him in May 1877. He wrote to his brother Modest, "It struck me as wild, and I made no reply." Wild indeed, for several reasons beyond the work's iconic status. Like many a literary masterwork, Pushkin's Eugene Onegin, written in 1833, has been cherished less for its tale than for the stupendous telling of it. It's not a drama, but a novel cast in fleet 14-line stanzas of intricately rhymed 8-syllable verse, which exploit the sonic majesties of the Russian language in a way unequaled before or since. In Onegin's penultimate stanza, Pushkin refers to his masterpiece as a free novel. By that, perhaps he meant a new type of work, one refusing to conform to the rules of existing genres. A work which is instead, as Pushkin wrote in its opening stanza, a collection of party-colored chapters, half funny, half sad, ideal, and prostonarodny, or of the common people. Prostonarodny, truly, though brimming with lyrical beauty, sassy slang, Byronic rhymes, cynical wit, psychological acuity, wry social and literary commentary, and dazzling wordplay, Eugene Onegin is as straightforward and zesty as a frosty glass of vodka. Its plot is slender and ordinary, with ironic symmetry in its non-events. Tatiana falls fruitlessly in love with Onegin, and then Onegin falls fruitlessly in love with Tatiana. Pushkin portrayed Onegin and Tatiana as typical youths of their time and class in the thrall of Western European Romanticism. He's a fan of Byron, she of Richardson. Soon after Pushkin's untimely Lenski-esque death in a duel, 6 years after completing Onegin, his novel was being hailed as a masterpiece of social diagnosis, depicting the nation's psychological archetypes. Onegin represented the Lishny Chelovyok, the superfluous man in a repressed society, finding no suitable outlet for his energies, and so frittering away his life in gambling, womanizing, cynicism, and ennui. Tatiana, yin to Onegin's yang, was the idealized Russian woman whose accessible, authentic emotions expressed the mighty Russian life force. The character of Onegin spawned a legion of malcontent males who haunt 19th century Russian literature, while Tatiana inspired such strong female characters as Dunya, Raskolnikov's sister in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and Natasha in Tolstoy's War and Peace. Though Tchaikovsky had initially hesitated to set Onegin to music, he swiftly changed his tune. The day after his visit with Lavrovskaya, he brought a copy of Pushkin's novel, spent a Tatiana-like sleepless night writing, and by morning he'd produced a scenario for his Onegin opera, one that differs only slightly from the final product. The next day, he enlisted his friend Konstantin Shilovsky to help him shape the libretto. Tchaikovsky ended up doing most of the work himself, preserving many of Pushkin's verses as a ready-made libretto, and creating his own Pushkin style, if not Pushkin quality, texts for the arias of Lenski and Prince Gremin. Shilovsky's major contribution were the couplets sung by Monsieur Triquet. Ablaze with inspiration, Tchaikovsky began composing right away, beginning with Tatiana's letter scene. He wrote to his friend Nikolai Kashkin, "I had so familiarized myself with the figure of Tatiana that she had become for me a living person. I loved Tatiana and was terribly indignant with Onegin, who seemed to me a cold, heartless peacock." There's a story behind there's a story behind Tchaikovsky's intense identification with Tatiana. During the same time period, the composer had coincidentally received several similarly confessional letters from one Antonina Milyukova, supposedly a former student of his, of whom he had no recollection, at the Moscow Conservatory. Resolved not to play Onegin to Milyukova's Tatiana, Tchaikovsky agreed to meet her, and, craving some domestic stability, impulsively proposed marriage, although he was gay. They were wedded on July 18th, but by early fall, Tchaikovsky had attempted suicide, suffered a nervous breakdown, fled from Milyukova, and been spirited away to recover by his brother Anatoly. His mental breakdown notwithstanding, Tchaikovsky wrote his operatic masterpiece in a mere 8 months, transforming Russia's most beloved work of fiction into the most beloved, arguably greatest of all Russian operas. Transform is, however, the operative word, for Tchaikovsky's Onegin diverges sharply from its literary source. One of the most striking features of Pushkin's Onegin is the narrator's voice that frames, relates, and comments upon the story with mordant detachment. Tchaikovsky was widely chided for removing the tale from its ironic framework in deference to the later, more sentimental era in which he lived, as well as to his own temperament. But it's obvious to any listener with a modicum of musicality that, in the words of musicologist Richard Taruskin, the music quite simply is the narrator, a busy and detached mediator of situations and feelings. Others have criticized the way in which Tchaikovsky radically departed from Pushkin in establishing Tatiana, rather than the title character, as the fulcrum and the heart of his Onegin. Tatiana's centrality is evident from the opera's first moment, when we hear, for the first of many times, her musical signature, a flattened sixth, the quintessential interval of the early 19th century Russian romance or parlor ballad. Tatiana's music, which opens and closes virtually every scene in Onegin, is saturated with these flattened sixths, and so is that of Lenski, the opera's other poetic dreamer. But Tatiana and Lenski are both so busy pining for their capricious love objects that they can't hear that they're soulmates. Tchaikovsky designated that his Onegin should be published as lyric scenes in 3 acts. As musicologist Karl Dahlhaus observed, it's a work whose substance resides in lyrical or contemplative monologues, picturesque interpolations, and in scenes of conversational tone. Perhaps because he recognized the uniqueness of his opera, Tchaikovsky insisted that its premiere be given by students from the Moscow Conservatory, which it was, in the Mali Theater on March 17, 1879. The professional premiere took place at the Bolshoi Theater in 1881. Tchaikovsky worried that the opera's subtleties might be overwhelmed by the grandiosity of a professional opera house. Its content is very unsophisticated, he wrote to his patron, Madame von Meck. There are no scenic effects. The music lacks brilliance and rhetorical effectiveness. His only hope was that it would, as he said, touch a few chosen listeners capable of appreciating the simple, everyday feelings common to all humankind. Well, judging by its performance history, Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin has resoundingly found and is likely to retain its audience. I'm sure Tchaikovsky would have loved this cast of supremely gifted Juilliard students and this beautiful, intimate production we're about to see. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to the inspired director who created it, my fellow vocal arts faculty member, Mary Birnbaum.
Thank you so much, Cori, and thanks for that beautiful, beautiful contextualization and historical placement of where this piece lay for us in the repertoire. I'm going to talk a little bit about the production you're going to see selections from tonight, which we enacted in 2014 in the Wilson Theater at Juilliard. And it was, from beginning to end, the process and the product, I think, were a dream. The cast was so incredibly young, but so talented, as you're going to see. And for everyone, including Avery Amaro, who played Olga, it was their first encounter with these roles, which Brian mentioned. Everybody's gone on to do it on the world stages. So when Brian came to me with the idea of doing Onegin in a sort of a smaller space, in our black box space, we both talked about the premiere of the production with the Moscow Art Theater and the students that had been in that. And then we talked about how really the piece is an intimate piece dressed up in kind of Russian finery. The dances in the piece and the sort of big chorus moments are not actually narrative moments. They're moments of texture of world. And so we thought about how could we do this with as few students and as few moving stage pieces as possible, just so that it felt like an intimate theatrical exploration of the themes that Tchaikovsky and Pushkin were interested in. So we ended up with a cast of 9 singers, 8 for most of the show, and then a Prince Gremin, who is Tatiana's husband, who comes in the last act, a chorus of 4, 1 on each part. And a reduced orchestration. We had 13 players led by the incredible Matt O'Coin, the composer and conductor, who is with us in spirit today. And we cut a lot of, we cut the role of the mother of Tatiana and Olga, for example, and kind of compiled her with the nurse, Filipievna, and gave those same lines to one singer, and made sure the thing was as sort of efficient and lithe as the dramaturgy of the piece really is. The other thing we wanted to focus on, as you so beautifully set up, Cori, was the point of view of Tatiana. The designers, Grace Laubacher and Anshuman Bhatia, and I talked a lot about Tatiana's transition from girlhood to womanhood and how her understanding of love worked during that transition. So we looked a lot at painters of during Pushkin's period, the first half of the 1800s, specifically Turner, Caspar David Friedrich, and Constable, and how they used light in their landscapes. And we kind of made an analogy to Instagram filters and how Tatiana was seeing the world through this kind of undifferentiated haze. I could fall in love with you one day, Lenski, or you the next day, Onegin. And the same is true, I think, for all of the lovers. There's a kind of a delicious question mark of what their lives will end up being, which resolves itself by the final act. She becomes much more clear in who she is after the rejection, the famous rejection from Onegin. And boundaries are set and limits are defined, and the space as we know it, the edges of the space are revealed. So what has come from this kind of gravity-free zone ensconced in a beautiful net of tulle, the audience had to sort of watch the show through this tulle, which gave it all a haze, was ripped away when Lenski dies and became a very grounded, very I think what Gina Levinson, our fantastic Russian diction coach, would have called a very noble Russian space with permanent boundaries and defined ideals. In the end of Onegin, it's amazing because it's a tragedy, but the person who dies in the middle of it. Really, what we're mourning is Tatiana's youth, and you'll hear that echoed throughout this entire presentation. This is a show about growing up, and this is a show particularly about a woman growing up. So with that said, the first selection you're going to hear tonight is Olga's aria from Act 1. We start in the morning at the Larina's house, Olga and Tatiana's house. And the 2 girls, who are sort of country aristocrats, hear singing from the peasants outside. And Olga chastises her older sister for being dreamy and distant and bookish. And she says, we're only young once, let's live life in the moment and enjoy every second we've got. I think it's what the kids are calling YOLO. And you'll hear this refrain. Why should I sigh when full of happiness my youthful days flow gently by? I was not made for melancholy singing. I do not like to dream in silence, nor on the balcony in the dark night, to sigh, sigh, sigh from the depths of my soul. In this selection, Olga is portrayed by Avery Amaro. Tatiana by Raquel Gonzalez, Filipievna by Samantha Henke, and The Other Nurse by Marguerite Jones. Enjoy.
Wow, Avery was born to sing that role. Don't
And
you
you
think?
know, Cori, this was her first opera that she was ever in. So it's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, only here at Juilliard. Since that time, she has graced stages including the Met, Salzburg, and Glenbourne. And recently, her debut Handel album was picked up as the editor's choice for the best new classical album in Gramophone.
Yeah, and this is just 7 years ago. Right?
Yeah, yes, 6 years ago.
The ingenue being a low mezzo is such a Russian thing. You don't really see that in any other operatic tradition.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and that Olga's so sprightly, but she sings so low. I loved particularly the moments where she was making fun of Raquel for sighing, or making fun of Tatiana for sighing, and going hugging Filipievna, who actually was 19 at the time she did this production, Sam Henke, which was an incredible feat. She didn't seem a day under 65, 68 the entire time.
And she's also all over the world stages right now.
Indeed. Yeah, she just did the premiere of Berikowski's new Rosenkavalier. She's rocking it. The next piece you're going to see is the Act 1 aria from the poet Lenski that Cori was mentioning before. And the aria is called "Ya lubiu tebia," or "I love you." His uncomplicated love mirrors Olga's uncomplication, and their affection in the foreground puts into relief how distant and dreamy and kind of dysfunctional Onegin and Tatiana's love affair would be. And so I was really interested in staging this piece in the idea of how to show love that's chance filled, or love that's versus love that's predestined. And I wanted to see the jealousy fight that happens with where Lenski sees Onegin flirting with Olga at Tatiana's name day party. So in researching, I found out that Blind Man's Bluff was a very popular party game of the time, particularly in sort of society circles, and decided to set this piece to that game. And now we're so excited to welcome in the wonderful tenor, Miles Mikkonen, who portrayed Lenski in the production, and he's going to introduce the piece for us. Hi, Miles.
Hi. It's great to see both of you. So this is the first of two Lenski arias, and I think it's the slightly more difficult aria to sing in the evening because it sits a little higher and actually has higher notes than the famous Kuda Kuda, which you will hear later tonight. Just one other little tidbit to listen for is the difference between Ya Lublu Vas, where it starts, which is the formal of you, or Ya Lublu Tiebia, which comes in at about 2/3 of the way through the aria, when Lenski really kind of sinks in and opens up and really wants to express just how much Olga means to him. So in this clip, you will again see Avery Amaro as my girlfriend Olga, along with Raquel Gonzalez as our Tatiana, and Takaoko Onishi as our Onegin. So here we go.
Hallelujah.
Bravo. It's so wonderful to see and hear that again.
As I was watching it, I was remembering, do you remember how many different versions of the blindfold we went through in order to get you to be able to see?
That was like a whole opera in itself, just the character of the blindfold through our production. And I forgot, I think I blocked out the fact that I couldn't see through the aria, and now watching that again, I was like, oh my gosh, the stress started coming back, because I couldn't see Matt, and so you're just listening and the orchestra's behind you. It was crazy, but I loved watching it. That was fun.
I know, and you were so brave for doing that. Thank you. The other thing that I was forgetting until you mentioned it was the vas, like the vous form in French, was totally where we started to get the idea of a generalized love for everybody in the room. And then once he directs it to Olga, that the tutoyer form, where those. Thanks for bringing that back.
Yeah, that's Gina Levinston, still in my brain, teaching me Russian.
Great Russian coach.
Yeah.
That we have at Juilliard.
So special. So the parallels of Lenski and Tatiana don't end here. Later on, we're going to witness Lenski's sort of dark night of the soul moment. And actually through the whole show, through this production at least, either Lenski or Tatiana is on stage. So it feels like they complete each other's arc in certain ways. And what we're now going to focus on is Tatiana's dark night of the soul in the form of the letter scene. Tchaikovsky's very famous. It's really just a full transition from darkness to light as we stay up all night with Tatiana as she decides to write her feelings for Onegin down to confess her love for him in a letter just after they've met. And we actually witness from her going to bed where she asks her Nana for a pencil and some paper to when the piper plays in the morning. And there's a beautiful musical moment that I encourage you all to listen for if you watch the whole show. We're going to share just because the scene is so long, we're going to share just a small excerpt with you. And this is the part where she kind of blooms into full fantasy about the predestined nature of, she now believes that this is fate and that they were meant for each other. And even though Onegin's cold, she can change him and a lot of other teenage girls' fallacies.
Last words.
I know. And I should just say teenage fallacies, like raise your hand if you've been there. So just to say, this is a couple of lines from the piece that led us towards the dream sequence staging you're about to see, where Tatiana says at the beginning of the letter, "You appeared before me in my dreams, as yet unseen, you were already dear. Your wondrous gaze filled me with longing. Your voice resounded in my heart long ago. No, it was no dream." And a beautiful anecdote about this, right after the production closed, we actually got to remount this letter scene for Ruth Bader Ginsburg's 83rd birthday party in her chambers. And we got to go down to court, and Justice Ginsburg, in her introduction of this aria, told us, she actually had just been nailed for falling asleep, I think, during the State of the Union address. And she said, just like Tatiana, I've been up all night writing. Which I thought was just the perfect sort of opera lover comparison. She also said, sent me a beautiful thank you note, which contained the sentence, "I will recall the afternoon when it is time to dream." which is a very Tatiana thing to say.
Wow.
So now, without further ado, the letter scene with Raquel Gonzalez.
Oh wait, that's like before the best part. You're leaving them wanting more.
We are doing that deliberately.
I was so into it. Oh my, Raquel sounds so good, and Mary, I just need to say the swing Beautiful,
Grace
beautiful
Laubacher.
directorial touch. And she's on tonight. I saw she's here in the chat.
Hi, Grace. You know what I was also reminded of, Miles? Remember at the first rehearsal, Matt O'Coin said to all of us, and it was maybe the only time I've heard it in a room since, and perhaps only time ever. Opera directors and opera conductors work together in different ways, but Matt articulated, the only musical notes I'm going to give you are dramatic notes, and the only dramatic notes Mary is going to give you are musical notes too. And the synthesis of those things, I think, was really present in the excerpt we just watched and on all of these today.
Well, and I mean, kudos to Matt for so many reasons, but that, like, to have a conductor and a director that really, like, you guys did see eye to eye and you had so much respect for one another, but you were also so, like, excited about working together. And then as a cast, that made all the difference in the world, because we had this, like, safe place to be creative. And I'm just reminded of that when I see Raquel swinging on the swing. I mean, it was just a magnificent kind of 6 weeks. Yeah.
Well, we are about to focus on the magnificence of Lenski. And so I wanted to turn it over to you a little bit and have you talk about Lenski's Dark Night of the Soul in Kuda Kuda, which is an aria I know you still sing a lot. So tell us about it, Miles.
Well, first of all, this is like the aria. I think that and the letter scene, there are a few other choice moments in the score, but definitely Kuda that the audience is waiting for. And as a tenor, that's kind of the, like, oh my goodness, here's the big moment, I better do well. So that was, that is always, it was on my shoulder while I was learning the role. And even when I sing it, those opening cello lines, you're still aware of it as the singer. And it's because it's like the most gorgeous piece of music. And as the character, this is really Lenski. It's the morning of the duel. It's moments before the duel. And he's been up all night, having just, like, lost his temper at Tatiana's party the night before. It was not supposed to be about him. And then he's spent all night sitting out in the woods, and it's cold out. It's January in Russia, so he's freezing, and he's all by himself. And just before the dawn breaks, he starts to ask, where have my golden days of spring gone? And from there, it's just kind of this psychological, it's more than expression. It's just kind of this outburst, I think, of Lenski coming to terms with that he is very likely experiencing his last moments on Earth. And we see his curiosity as a poet, looking at the sky, trying to take that in for the last time, his last sunrise. He's trying to look around at nature, and then finally he's just looking for Olga. And that's where the heart breaks, I think, in the aria. And finally, in the last moments, he's kind of just screaming out to the world, please, my desired, my longing friend, come, like, save me, take me away from this place. You're the only one that actually can, because if not, I'm going to go through this duel. And he's just waiting for Olga to come and save him. So here is an excerpt of Kuda Kuda with me.
Oh my gosh.
So that's singing. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So Miles, tell us, so you then, was it that year or the next year when you sang this on the stage of the Met for the MONC competition?
It was actually 5 years later. I had to do the math for a second. It was 5 years later, and that's the thing with this. With Lenski, he was like my first role, and it was kind of like my coming out as a singer, just like Tatiana's Name Day. It felt like that, I think, for all of us, because it was like Avery's first opera ever, and we were all super nervous. And so, but those roles have all become kind of staples in our repertoire, and that aria for me, I love to sing it in auditions because you get to really just kind of show your heart. And then I sang it. Let's see, I definitely sang it in the semifinal round of the Met. That was my second aria that they asked for. And then we programmed it for the finals. So that was one of the two arias I sang the year that I won in 2019. So it was like that full circle moment where Lenski has been in my life for some really big, important moments as a singer. Like my first major role, the Met competition.
He's going to stay here.
Let's hope. I love him so much.
And looking at it too, thinking about like, you had just a bare stage to work on. By that point, we had stripped the swing and all of the sort of accoutrements of youth away from you. Yeah. Was there any image in your mind that was really present as you were working? I remember we talked a lot about where the geography.
two.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was fun to see the grave again in the floor, because I remember in rehearsals we talked a lot about the images that Lenski talks about is like hell, the river Leith, and like the grave that he's going into, and also heaven and the sky and the light that's coming in the day. And actually, those two images, I remember like seeing the grave, trying to do that as an actor and really be symbolic and think about like what is he going through when he steps back into that spot that he's kind of made his own grave, where he thinks he's going to die and get shot here. So that was going through my brain there. But then I also remember, which happens often when you sing high notes, you kind of like blur out, and because I think there's like no oxygen, there's not enough oxygen to the brain, so you sometimes just get like and I remember that was also, I was looking right into the lights that Anshu beautifully lit, and that was always when I sing it was not just like me losing the oxygen to my brain, but it was also like the light kind of like almost taking over me. And it was like it was always an overwhelming moment, because I never knew if I'd make it to the end of the phrase. But those are the two images that I still have in my brain when I think of like those performances at Juilliard.
I'm probably projecting, but looking at you after the final cutoff and how like your lower body is kind of like sinking into the ground, it feels like at the final strains of the aria play. Really beautiful work.
Well, that was you, Mary, directing. Beautiful. I remember that staging day. We had like 3 hours just on that aria, which only happens at Juilliard, that you have enough time to actually stage and work on a piece as it should. So we had like an hour and a half or a 3 hour rehearsal just on that aria.
May it be that way after COVID. Maybe when we go back to work, it'll be like that in the world.
This is just, this is probably one of my desert island operas. And I have to say, this is probably the best production I've ever seen of it. And I think part of it is, it's your brilliant, it just, you just drill down to the fundamentals of this piece, Mary, you and Matt. And, it's just the piece and the performers in such an impactful way. And also just the fact that how often do you see these roles played by age appropriate performers? These are supposed to be kids in the original. And so it's so beautiful.
We had such a great time. Should we do some questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the audience sent in some good questions. Why do you suppose Lenski and Olga were drawn together? That's a good question. And what is it about Onegin that makes Tatiana fall for him? Well, Miles, why don't you take the why do you suppose Lenski and Olga were drawn together?
Opposites attract, I guess, and it's no secret, as you mentioned, Cori, in your the opening presentation, that it would make so much more sense for Lenski and Tatiana to be together, the writer and the reader. I mean, that is the obvious pairing there, and
there would be no opera.
But then there would be no opera, and so I think Lenski as kind of the artist that wants to feel the most in his life. He wants all the pain and the joy and everything. He's putting himself in this relationship that is just frankly doomed, because Olga will never love him like Lenski needs to be loved. And that's the heartbreaking part.
Yeah. So Mary, what do you think about why Tatiana falls for Onegin?
Well, I think there's there's two answers to it. One is the allure of the dark horse and the person who's not giving in energy like you see with your sister. Your sister's boyfriend is so effusive, so loving, and somebody else, and another person enters the room who is nothing like that, and there's an intrigue there. But I also think there is especially in the world we created, there was a scarcity factor where Olga and Lenski are coupled up, and Tatiana sees someone enter the world and she goes, maybe you're it. Maybe you're the person I've been reading about and waiting for. And later on, we sort of understand that actually, no, it might be Gremin, that person, that real sort of important person. But at this point, she has her life is yet to be written. So she goes along with it.
And it's also that, he acts like Byron. She's been
Right.
reading all these romantic novels, and here's this guy that comes in and acts like he's some great hero of a novel.
Totally. He's standing at the edge of the rock looking over into the mist, and she's like, what is in there? Show me
I have
it.
two thoughts also that I had never really put together, but Lenski introduces Tatiana to Onegin. So it's like, here's my sister's boyfriend introducing me to this man. I should trust him. That is somebody who should be looking out for me, right? And so I think even from the very first moment, you have somebody that's in Tatiana's circle saying, here's somebody for you.
Totally. And he's from the city, which is something that you've craved, the sort of sophistication of that. He's here,
Yes.
here for the summer.
My last other point with the parallel between Tatiana and Lenski, the last words they ever say, Lenski's last phrase to Olga is the same thing that Tatiana says to Onegin at the end of the opera. It's slightly switched. Lenski, it's Prashai Naviak, that big A at the end of Act 2. And then at the end of the opera, it's Prashai Naviak. And that's Tatiana saying goodbye to Onegin. So there's this like, Tchaikovsky knew what he was doing, and these parallels between the lovers that should be together, and which means goodbye forever. Prashai Naviak. I mean, it's just
we get to see Lenski live out the death of the sort of death of youth, and then Tatiana picks up as an adult right away. So it's almost like she learns his lesson through osmosis, or by even though she's off stage at that time.
Yeah,
right.
Lesson comes at a high price. Should we take another question?
Let's do it.
See. In what ways is Tatiana a product of her environment, and in what ways is she a woman ahead of her time? Well, Mary, I bet you have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought of her as very modern, very contemporary throughout the whole, and her feelings as incredibly well articulated by Tchaikovsky and also by Pushkin in the text. And I think that I don't know that she was that much. I guess her expectations for how her life would go are a product of her time. And exactly what Miles just mentioned, this idea of like, okay, I'm going to get set up by a friend. It's going to be a conventional route, and I'm going to, nothing bad is going to happen. I'm going to continue to live a sort of a comfortable upper middle class life. And then she sort of does actually fulfill that. But I would argue, I think looking at it, particularly in our production, we made it seem like that was not a choice out of necessity. It was actually a love match for her. And so that, again, was like a very contemporary. Yeah.
Really great choice. Yeah.
Well, we had Ernai Kursa as Gremin, so it was impossible to go anywhere else but the heart on that one.
Yeah. But also it just makes her choice at the end make so much more sense, than it usually does in most productions. It's just...
What do you think, Cori? Do you think she was a product of her time, or
yes, but it, like so many great literary and dramatic characters, she's simultaneously a product of her time and a really universal figure. That's, I think, one of the reasons why she's so vivid and such a beloved character is that even though she's very much in a lot of ways a character who could only have been born in the early 19th century. There's so much about her that all of us can relate to. Everybody, I think.
Totally, and she gets the best revenge at the end of the opera. We have him write her a letter, and she tears it to shreds. And that is the most juicy, particularly looking at a famous pianist from that period. Yeah. It's just the most juicy thing to think about and play.
I know, and it's just, the fact that when he all of a sudden falls in love with her, when all of a sudden she's become a princess and she's glamorous, and she's married.
And the most important one.
He uses exactly the same words that she did in her letter. Please, she makes a good choice at the end.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, should we take one more question?
Sure.
Wow. What was the biggest risk you took as an artist in this piece, and how do you feel it played out for you? That's a terrific question. And this is from Tammy Cook, who's a friend of mine. She lives in Albuquerque. Wonderful soprano herself.
Mary,
Miles,
do you want to?
no, you do it. You go. You go.
I think, oh gosh. I mean, there was definitely as opera singers, you're always balancing the expectations from what the audience will ultimately have. Like, okay, they have fill in any number of tenors who have sung this and recorded this. That's what they're going to come into the audience with in their ear. So it's like they want to hear that. So like, and that's part of our job, is to live up to the score and to really create and to give a performance that can, to the best of our abilities, live up to that. And then at the same time, because we were in school and we had such a talented artistic and creative team, wanting to kind of break out of that and still act it and say, okay, we don't have a full chorus. We don't have the things that people are going to come to expect from this. So what is that? It opened up a world of possibilities. So I think in a weird way, the artistic risk for me became trying to balance both of those, the expectations and the surprises, I guess, as a performer. And I will also add, this was one of the greatest lessons at Juilliard, because that's now one of the things I try to do in my performing, knowing that I was able to do that, I think, sort of in Onegin. So I don't know if that made any sense, but
No,
that's
definitely.
at least in my head, that was what was going on.
And when you and I have worked together since, I always find that abandon is there, because you can trust that the work that you do is great and will lead you into unexplored and uncharted territories, even though you know the repertoire so well. I think the biggest risk that the production took was how little there was. I mean, I really think we really stripped it down, and I remember there was such a small amount of chairs. We didn't use a chair in the first act. It was just the swing. And Miles was on a bare stage. The duel scene was totally a bare stage the entire time. And then we actually stripped it down further after that and revealed the orchestra. So it was really an exercise in how essential can it be, which was a risk I wanted to take again.
That was the genius of the production, and it could only be done by a really great director and great cast. But we had that, both things, and it was just, the piece at its very essence. And I think that's one of the things that makes this such a strong production. Yeah. Well, we could go on talking about this great show.
So fun. Thanks.
But it's time for me to thank everybody for joining us. And before we begin our stream of the complete Eugene Onegin, I'd like to introduce you to our colleague, Kaylin Giannini, from Juilliard's Development Department, for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cori, and thank you to Mary and Miles. Oh, to be a part of your Love Fest for the past hour was such fun. I think we can all feel your energy and your camaraderie together. And as Cori mentioned, you will now be able to watch the whole production for another week. It's now live and ready for you to take a look at and see the whole thing and see how it transitions and see Mary's vision come to life, and of course Miles' incredible voice and all the other singers who've gone on to these incredible careers as well. What a joy it is to see that building, or not the building, but the theater and production. And thank you all for being a part of this tonight, and to our viewers for watching and for your support of Juilliard. We are so grateful. Have a great night. Thank you.